So in the next couple of classes, we'll be having our Chapter 8 test. So this is a Chapter 8 review video, just kind of overviewing everything that we've learned in Chapter 8. The first things we talked about were classifying polynomials. There were two different ways. There was by number of terms and by degree. Number of terms, remember terms are the things that are separated by the plus and minus signs. If we had something like 2x squared plus 3x minus 4, that is a trinomial because it has three terms. If the problem was just 2x squared plus 3x, then this would be a binomial because it only has two terms. And breaking it down even more, if it was just 2x squared, that would be a monomial because it only has one term. We also learned how to classify by degree. The degree is the highest exponent in the expression. So if our expression was, wrong little tool, let me get my pencil. If the expression was 2x to the third power plus 5x squared plus 3, our highest exponent is a 3, which means we have 3 degrees, or a cubic function. This one specifically would be a cubic trinomial because it has 3 terms. So remember, we will be classifying by degree and by number of terms. We also talked about adding and subtracting polynomials. For this one, we line up our like terms, and when we're subtracting, we distribute our negative. So here we start with the first expression, 2x squared minus 3x plus 2. Remember to leave spaces. If we're skipping out a term, like if it had just said x squared plus 2, we would want to leave a space for our x term just so we can make sure everything lines up, even if it wasn't there. Next, our negative distributes out, so we'll have a negative x squared, a negative 2x, and a negative 1. And we can add straight down. X squared minus x squared gets us 0. Negative 3x minus 2x, or negative 3x plus negative 2x, gives us a negative 5x. And 2 minus 1 is a positive 1. And our final answer would be negative 5x plus 1. Multiplying. When we have polynomials, we're either going to multiply by using our FOIL method or the table method, or if we can, just by simple distribution. Here's an example of a distribution problem. You have the parentheses and you have one term outside of the parentheses. When you have just that one term, we can go ahead and distribute. 2 times 3 is 6. X squared times x to the third power is x to the fifth power. Remember, when we're multiplying the same variable, we add together their exponents. So moving on, 2 times 2 is 4. X squared times x would be x to the third power. 2x squared times 4 would be 8x squared. And that is the product of 2x squared and 3x to the third power plus 2x plus 4. Multiplying, here we have two binomials that we have to multiply. Now, we can use the FOIL method or the table method. I'll show you both methods. First is FOIL. Multiply together your first terms. 2x times x is 2x squared. Multiply together your outer terms. 2x times 4 is 8x. Multiply together your inner terms. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. And then finally multiply together your last terms. Negative 3 times 4 would be negative 12. Now remember, the main goal of FOILing is to make sure that each term in one binomial gets multiplied by the terms of the other binomial. So 2x is multiplied both by x and 4, and negative 3 is multiplied both by x and 4. Once we have our 4 terms here, we can combine our like terms. Remember, like terms are variables with the same exponent. So 2x squared 8x minus 3x is a positive 5x minus 12. And this is our final answer. We cannot reduce it anymore because we have no more like terms. Some of us don't like the FOIL method and we prefer using our table method. For the table method, you put each term 2x minus 3, x positive 4 on the outside of your table, and then we multiply in. What is 2x times x? That would be 2x squared. Negative 3 times x would be negative 3x. 2x times 4 is 8x, and negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. We then can combine our like terms and write our expression. 2x squared, 8x minus 3x is a positive 5x minus 12. And again, you'll notice we got the same exact answer because it was the same exact question. It just depends on how you like to do the problem yourself. Now factoring. We learned a lot of different ways of factoring. Remember, factoring is like unfoiling or unmultiplying or just like dividing. We're trying to separate it out and say what two things multiply together to give me that expression as an answer. So the first thing you do every time is look for a greatest common factor and divide it. If you have a binomial left, you'll look for a difference of squares, otherwise you're done. If you have a trinomial left, you'll factor using either the regular method, the Xbox method, or the guess and check method, depending on if you have a coefficient in front of your x squared term. If you have 4 or more terms, then we'll use factoring by grouping. Let's go ahead and do a few examples. So the first step is to look for a greatest common factor. Looking here, I have 2x squared and 12x. I notice that I can divide out a 2x from both of those. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. X squared divided by x would just be an x. 12 divided by 2 is 6. X divided by x would just be 1, so there's no x's left. Inside, I have a binomial. I look, I ask myself, is this a difference of squares? No, it's not. Therefore, I'm done factoring. These are the two things that multiply together to equal 2x squared plus 12x. Moving on and doing some more practice. Again, we look through and we say, is there a greatest common factor that I can divide out? Looking at the terms 3x squared, 18x, and negative 21, I see that 3 can divide out of each of those. I'll be left on the inside of my parentheses with x squared plus 6x minus 7. Inside the parentheses, I am left with a trinomial. That means I will either factor the normal way, or the Xbox method way, or guess and check. Looking at this, I see that there is not a coefficient in front of my x squared term. That means that I can go ahead and just factor this the old-fashioned way. What two numbers multiply to be negative 7, but add together to be 6? I notice that because my last term is negative, I know that my two binomials will have different signs. One will be positive and one will be negative. This is going to be x and x. So we need two factors that multiply to be a negative 7, but add to be positive 6. Thinking through, I know positive 7 times negative 1 is negative 7. Positive 7 plus negative 1 would be 6. And we still have that 3 out in front that we factored out earlier. This is our final factored answer. Looking at this problem, 5x squared plus 19x minus 4, I first ask myself, is there a greatest common factor that I can divide out? Looking through, 5, 19, and 4, nothing will divide out of those. Seeing that I have a number in front of my x squared, that means I'm going to have to either use my Xbox method or guess and check. I'll demonstrate both. First, the Xbox method. We'll multiply together our first and last terms and get negative 20x squared on the top, and our middle term goes down to the bottom. We are now looking for two numbers that multiply to be negative 20 but add together to be 19, and that will be 20x and negative 1x. Our x is done. It's called the Xbox method, so let's move on to our box. Inside the box, the first term of our equation or expression goes in the first box. The last term of our expression goes in the last box. And the two side numbers that we found go into our little diagonal boxes. We then go through and divide out the greatest common factors. Greatest common factor of 5x squared and 20x is 5x. Greatest common factor between negative 1x and negative 4 is a negative 1. Greatest common factor between 5x squared and negative 1x is just x. And the greatest common factor between 20x and negative 4 is 4. Now remember, we can go through and multiply those just like how we multiplied with the table method, and we should get those answers. Is 5x times x 5x squared? Yes. Go through all of those and you'll be able to check your answer that way. We write our final answer as a set of binomials. 5x minus 1, we get that from the side of our table, and x plus 4, which we also got from the side of our table. Now, some of us prefer the guess and check method, where you have to look through and try to FOIL two binomials to see if we can get the right answer. 5x squared, I know the only way that I can get 5x squared is if I had 5x and x. For negative 4, I can have 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. Those are my factors that multiply together to be negative 4. We're going to have one positive and one negative answer. Because my middle number is a positive, I will want my largest product to be positive. So I'm just going to go through and plug things in, and as I try plugging, I see if I did a plus 4 here and a minus 1 here, when I FOILed that, I would have 20x minus 1x, which would get me 19x. So this is my final answer. Again, guess and check can take a little longer sometimes, depending on how many factors you have to plug in and try, but for some of us, once we get the hang of it, we like it a lot. Here, looking at our problem, we first check and see if there's a greatest common factor. Do we have a greatest common factor between 81 and 4? No, we do not. We see we have a binomial here, so we need to check if it's a difference of perfect squares. Can I take the square root of 81? Yes, the square root of 81 is 9. Can I take the square root of 4? Yes, the square root of 4 is 2. Is this a difference problem? Difference means subtraction, so yes, this is a difference problem. That means I'm going to go ahead, set up my two binomials. I know it's going to be a plus and a minus because that's the rule. Square root of 81x squared is 9x and 9x. Square root of 4 is 2. And 2. And that is our final factored answer. Our last problem we're going to do, we look through and we have to see if we can divide out a greatest common factor. Looking at 24x to the 4th minus 12x to the 3rd plus 8x squared minus 4, I notice that the number that can divide into each of those is 4, and each one of these terms has at least one x. So I'm going to say 4x is my greatest common factor. Going through, 24 divided by 4 is 6. X to the 4th, take out one of the x's, will be x to the 3rd. Negative 12 divided by 4 is negative 3. X to the 3rd divided by x will be x to the 2nd. 8 divided by 4 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. And negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1. X divided by x will be 1, so we just stop there. Now, looking inside our parentheses, we see that we have 4 terms left. That means that we're going to have to factor by grouping. I group together my first 2 terms, and I group together my last 2 terms. Going through, remember you still have this 4x out front, but let's factor our insides. The first 2 terms, we look for our greatest common factor, and that would be 3x squared. When we factor that out, we're left with 2x minus 1. And then factoring our last terms, we look and the greatest common factor is 1. And when we divide out that 1, we're still left with 2x minus 1. For our final factored answer, again, remember we have 4x out there, but we're going to have our 2 binomials. The first binomial will be whatever has been repeated, that repeated factor, which in this case is 2x minus 1. It has been repeated in both terms. So 2x minus 1. And then the last term is whatever is left over. We have 3x squared and a positive 1. And this is our final factored answer. I hope that you guys found this video helpful for your review. I hope you watch it a few times if you need the extra help. And I hope you'll be ready for the test and the review day. So, the joke of the day. What do you call a fake noodle? An impasta.